Mr. Chair, I can confirm that you can go ahead. The YouTube live stream is now live.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hartley Lefton. I'm the chair of the Board of Directors of the Toronto Parking Authority. The Board Secretary has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'll now call to order meeting 15 of the Board of Directors of the Toronto Parking Authority. Welcome to this special meeting of the Board. This meeting is again being held using the city's WebEx technology, with directors, staff, and others calling in or connecting by video conference, and in some cases, attending in person at Toronto City Hall. Under normal circumstances, we would not be able to hold a virtual meeting of the Board, but as permitted by Ontario law, Toronto City Council has recently amended our meeting rules to allow these meetings during the COVID-19 emergency. And I will say, I hope that you and your families are all doing well and staying safe. Once the emergency is over, we will return to holding our meetings in person, and this will all be done in accordance with advice from the City of Toronto's Medical Officer of Health. Because we are meeting remotely, we'll ask for your patience with any delays or technical issues, such as those we've experienced before the meeting. Members of the public can observe the meeting on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live, one word, youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. I understand that there are no registered public speakers for this meeting. I would like to remind all City and TPA staff and invited participants to please stay muted with video turned off unless you need. This will make it easier for the directors, not least myself, along with those watching on YouTube, to identify directors as they participate in debate and vote on agenda items this afternoon. I would also ask directors to keep mics muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item. As part of each agenda item, I will remind directors to raise their hands or unmute their mics if you wish to question staff or speak to an item. If it is your turn to speak, I'll call your name, and then you'll have time to question staff or speak to the item. Please ensure when speaking that you unmute your mic and that your video is on. We've all been on calls where people speak while muted. It's amusing at first, and we'll try not to have it go on too long. When voting on an item or a motion, I will ask that directors ensure that video is on and they raise their hands to indicate their vote as being either in favor or opposed. This is somewhat different than last week when we had, or last meeting when we had recorded votes. I will try to go back to something as close as possible to the system that we're used to in in-person meetings. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, in accordance with our custom, the Board of Directors of the Toronto Parking Authority acknowledges that the land on which we usually meet is the traditional territory of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'd also like to re-acknowledge our commitment to diversity and inclusion of all people in the City of Toronto, and most notably underrepresented groups, and doing what we can to further these important values. Directors, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Seeing none, we'll proceed. Directors of the Board, as this is a special meeting under Council procedures, the Board may only consider the business on the agenda and no other business. I would ask directors to please email motions on any agenda items to the Board Secretary at tpaboard, that's tpaboard, @toronto.ca. We'll now proceed to consider the 4 items on the agenda. The first item is item 15.1, Toronto Parking Authority 2019 Audited Financial Statements. I'd like to ask Robin Oliphant, Acting President of TPA, to provide a brief overview of this item to the Board. I understand that Terry McKinnon, Partner Risk Assurance Services of PricewaterhouseCoopers, is here to provide an update on the 2019 audited financials and a summary on significant accounting and financial reporting matters from the audit process.
Thank you, Hartley. First, thank you to the accounting team for meeting and exceeding the challenges of working remotely to help deliver a well-organized audit. The audit is now substantially complete, and briefly, highlights of our 2019 results include net income for the year at $78.8 million, up $11.8 million, which is driven primarily from a gain on sale of 221 St. Patrick of $7 million, on-street revenue growth of $2.1 million, along with lower rent, maintenance, and municipal taxes associated with car park closures, particularly the closure of 50 Cumberland late 2018. Off-street revenue for the year remained flat over 2018 as rate increases were offset by construction and lot closures, reducing transaction volume by 5.5%. Bike Share's operating loss is $2.4 million for the year, primarily due to advertising and sponsorship shortfalls. Unfortunately, this will continue in 2020 as COVID has shut down the out-of-home advertising market. 2019 Bike Share ridership was up 21% to over 2.4 million rides. Ridership revenue grew $860,000 to $3.5 million, and membership grew to 208,000 members. Now, subsequent to year-end, during the first 4 months of 2020, parking operation earnings have dropped 61% to $8 million compared to last year's $21 million. Bike Share's operating loss to date is $1.5 million, primarily due to timing, as peak revenue season is during the summer months. However, this loss is expected to remain as the advertising market has fallen. Year-to-date ridership revenue is up 11% over last year. For the first 3 weeks of May, it is also up again, 29% compared to last year. Since mid-May, we have seen some increase to parking volume, about a further 5% over last year. However, city initiatives to support physical distancing, such as curb TO and active TO, will increase road restrictions and are expected to have an impact on commuters and parking. At this time, approximately 230 on-street parking spaces have been removed for curb TO initiatives. Also at this time, it is expected that many companies will likely continue to keep staff working remotely through the summer and possibly through the fall or into 2021. Depending on how the city reopens, we may see day rate maximums lifted by private operators. However, TPA will keep a close eye on the recovery and how the competition adjusts to parking demand. Our focus today remains on cash flow at this time. We are continuing to review all major repairs and maintenance procurement bids to ensure only those considered essential or contractually required are proceeding. Assuming current parking levels don't change significantly, we do expect to have sufficient cash to carry us into early 2021 with today's operating levels. And finally, the annual report is being drafted and will be presented at the July board meeting for comment. I would now like to invite our audit partner, Terry McKinnon, to provide an update on the status of PwC's work, as well as a summary on significant accounting and financial reporting matters dealt with during the audit process. Terry?
You're on mute.
Robin. I'll start my report on slide 4. It's titled the slide Status of the Audit. As you can imagine, the audit was very thankfully, we were set up to do that in terms of we had digital tools that we've been using over the last few years in order to enable us to be able to pull down information electronically from an FTP site. So there was a lot more work that was required on management's behalf because they basically had to scan or upload every single audit support we required. So I want to thank the management team at TPA for supporting us in that regard, because as you can see on the slide for status of the audit, we are substantively complete. The things that you see on this list are those that are outstanding at this point in time until the board approves the financial statements. So we are in a position to release our opinion once the board has approved the financial statements. So I just want to make some highlights starting on slide 6 of the work that we did around significant risks. Significant risks, the first 2 are the same for every entity. So the first one has to do with revenue recognition and making sure there's no fraud with respect to revenue recognition. There is a lot of work that we do on the internal controls over cash at the various different elements of the operations, whether it be street parking, off-street parking, looking at the other methods of obtaining the information through Moneris and other cash receipt vehicles. So we have completed the work with respect to our revenue testing, and there were no matters to bring to your attention. We did not find any fraud or legal acts. The next item on slide 7 is the management override. Again, this is a fraud risk as well. And the main work that we do here on this slide has to do with obtaining all the journal entries that is processed through Toronto Parking Authority. The reason why we focus on journal entries is because typically fraud is covered up through journal entries. So we use a data analytics tool that allows us to be able to basically use risk criteria and go through every single journal entry that was recorded to see if any of those journal entries met our risk criteria. So again, based on the work that we performed, there were no matters to bring to your attention. We were able to execute it with no issue. The next matter on slide 8 has to do with the change in accounting. So the Toronto Parking Authority follows international reporting standards. It's what's required for a for-profit entity that is government. And so there was a new standard that came out with regards to leases. Management performed a full analysis of their leases in regards to the criteria that are in the international reporting standards. And based on the work that was done, there was a couple of leases that had to be recorded on the balance sheet that had not previously been recorded on the balance sheet. And there was no errors with regards to the analysis that was performed by management. The next slide, slide 9, this has to do with a garage that is under construction, whereby the purchaser of the property has filed for insolvency. So that triggering event required us to then take a look at whether it was going to be possible for that garage to be built, given that the purchaser had filed for insolvency. So there's a number of things that we've outlined on this slide that we performed along with management in terms of getting supporting documentation. And at the end, we determined and agreed with management that there was no impairment, that the garage is likely to be built, and the value that is on the balance sheet, and you'll see it under the investment in garage, it's that particular asset that we were assessing for impairment. Under audit findings, if you go to slide 11, just to communicate what our overall materiality was that we used throughout our audit. So it was roughly 7.9 million, and we based that on net income prior to the distribution to the city. So we would report to you any unadjusted or adjusted items that are above $787,000. So it's a fairly low threshold. And we are confirming here on this slide that we did not find any errors above that threshold. So as far as we're concerned, we believe that the financial statements are free of material error. On to slide 13. One thing I wanted to highlight here was the fraud and illegal acts. You've heard me comment that we did not but as you are aware, we are required to ask this board in terms of whether you have been made aware of any fraud or illegal acts, that, whether anything's come to your attention directly. We need to ask this question prior to issuing our auditor's report to ensure there's nothing we need to investigate prior to finalizing. So through to the chair, are you aware of any fraud or illegal acts that's come to your attention directly?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm not, no.
Thank you. And subsequent events, we're not aware of anything besides COVID, which clearly has a big impact on you. We're not aware of any subsequent events that have happened since December 31st that might materially impact the financial statements. Just through to the chair again, whether you are aware of any.
Not from 2019, no. Obviously, as you say, COVID.
Great, thank you. So just on that topic, if we go to slide 18, clearly COVID had an impact on our audit, as I mentioned, but it also has had a significant impact on Toronto Parking Authority. So one of the things that we are required to look at as part of the compilation of the financial statements in our report thereon is whether there's anything that should be disclosed in the financial statements related to a subsequent event. So As you can see here, the impact on operations, we had discussions with management that clearly this is going to have an impact on your parking revenues for 2020, given the quarantining and social distancing that's happening. And there's been some employee emergency leaves and an impact on the workforce. So as a result of that, we have included a subsequent event note to the financial statements, which just basically alerts users of the financial statements that the 2020 financial statements will be impacted by this event. And the other thing I would highlight is our auditor's report in Appendix 1. It is unmodified, which is what you want. It means it's a clean audit, and there were no major issues as a result of conducting our audit. So I conclude my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oliphant and Ms. McKinnon. Are there any questions of staff or Ms. McKinnon on this item? If you have questions, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Mr. Steiner.
Yes, good morning, I think, or good afternoon. It certainly should be noticed that the audit seems to have gone very, very well, and our team at the TPA must have been very well prepared, because there are no adjustments, no issues. It's on your slide number 3, which I thought was very good. You jumped to slide number 4, but slide number 3 shows a very good performance. I just wanted to double check with you. You every year look at the issue of fraud, cash, particularly at our parking lots, the off-street one, and you've confirmed to us that after examining that, you found no issues to raise with us. I believe that's correct from the auditor.
Yes, we have selected a sample of transactions and tested the internal controls and did not find any issues.
That's terrific. And then secondly, on an unpredicted basis, as part of the looking at fraud, you did this year a special look at a sample of our vendors, and that too showed no incidents or any issues that would concern you about fraud. And then you concluded that the opinion is unqualified or unmodified, as you said, which is a clean audit in your professional opinion for 2019. Correct. Terrific. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Other than to say, I guess, each director should affirm, I think, to the auditor that we know of no incident of fraud and no other subsequent events. So I'll just confirm that for myself as one of the directors, that on either of those two questions, I have nothing to report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Are there any other questions? And I think that's a very good recommendation from Mr. Steiner. If anyone does have any indications of fraud or material events, if you could please describe them. I see no other questions or comments. The only question I would have is whether there are any recommendations that the auditor suggests for next year. Appreciating this is a clean opinion, which is very good. Is there anything that we could be doing better for next year?
Based on the work that we performed, we did not find any matters to bring to your attention. Nothing significant. Sometimes there's minor items that we bring to management's attention, but nothing significant came to our attention.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Farrow.
I have a follow-up question to that. As a professional organization doing these audits now, as you go through the COVID-19 period and the post-COVID-19 period, has Pricewaterhouse got any guidelines they're putting out to their clients in terms of the upcoming yearly audit?
At this point, we haven't been putting out any guidance about next year's audits. We've been focusing in on helping our clients through webinars and discussions about how they can prepare for, right now, the hot topic is protect yourselves and protect your employees from a risk perspective. But we haven't started having those conversations about next year's audit yet. Something we did assess, though, was although COVID happened after year end, what we were looking at was whether there had been any changes to internal controls as a result of COVID and working remotely, the teams working remotely, that would impact the aggregation of the financial statements of financial reporting. And we understand that the internal controls haven't changed, which is what we're seeing with other organizations as well. People are just doing the controls either remotely or they're going into the place of business once or twice a week in order to be able to perform those controls.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff or the auditor on this item? Seeing none, are there any speakers to the item? Seeing none, I will move that we adopt the staff recommendation. Can the board secretary please display the staff recommendation on the screen? Board secretary, able to please display the recommendation on the screen? Thank you. The acting president, Toronto Parking Authority, recommends that the board of directors of Toronto Parking Authority approve the audited financial statements for the year ended December 31, 2019. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much to staff and to the auditor for all of your assistance. And one of the more strange audits I hope that we ever deal with. Next item is item PA 15.2, Toronto Parking Authority 2020 results of follow-up of previous forensic unit recommendations. I understand that Beverly Romeo Beeler, the Auditor General of the City of Toronto, and Ina Chan, the Assistant Auditor General, are here to provide a brief overview of this item to the board. Ms. Romeo Beeler and Ms. Chan?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to the entire board. And it's my pleasure to meet you. My name is Beverly Romeo Beeler. I am the Auditor General for the City of Toronto. And for items 2 and 3, before I start, I'd like to give a little background on our follow-up process. Whenever we conduct an audit across the city, and the recommendations are endorsed and supported by boards and city council, as a service, what we do is we go back to verify on the behalf of the board and on behalf of city council that recommendations have been implemented. And so what we do is every year we come back to management and we do 2 things. We identify the ones, if they say a recommendation is implemented, we in fact obtain evidence to verify that the recommendation has been implemented. And if management is underway with implementing a recommendation, we allow management to outline how far they've gotten within our report. We don't audit that part. That's really for management, and as soon as they said it's been implemented, and then we get our evidence. So you have a few reports before you today, and on the forensic report, this report it relates, of course, to the follow-up of the Finch Road, the land acquisition at Finch Avenue West. And what I can say is that there's 3 recommendations, and one has been fully implemented, and we asked simply management to and the clerk to consider requiring board members to have a designation, and they've considered that, and they've chosen not to implement it. But we also have made recommendations around more training for the boards, and I believe that the recommendation is actually something that is really improving governance across the city. And so that's something to be proud of. So management has moved along in the forensic reports. They've moved along quite a bit. And I'll allow if the president would like to speak to it. But essentially, what I'm seeing is that they've moved as far as they can, and really some of these tie to the city clerk assisting with the recommendations. And so I feel that in the forensic report and in the parking authority report that things are moving along. What you want to see is recommendations being implemented and movement, and I have both of those. And I know I'm just going to speak a little bit to the Arrow Road report. Since the Arrow Road report has come out, and there's been a different change in management, I find management to be very responsive. I find them to be transparent, and I find them to be collaborative. And the tone at the top has changed, and I have to say that I'm not worried that the rest of the recommendations are going to be implemented. So I'll leave that with you. I'm going to turn in relation to item 3. If it's okay, I'd like to allow the Assistant Auditor General to speak to that report. She was the lead on that report, so she'll give her insight into the progress on the recommendations.
For item 3, Toronto Parking Authority 2020 results of the follow-up of previous audit recommendations. In 2016, we issued a report, by way of background, in 2016, we issued a report on the results of our audit of revenue operations of off-street controlled facilities, and the report contained 12 recommendations. Since the time of our audit, this is the 3rd year that we have conducted follow-up of the implementation of recommendations. In previous years, 8 recommendations were fully implemented. And from the time they're implemented, management's responsible for making sure the improvements continue on an ongoing basis and we don't follow up on them further. But this year, management has reported that they continue to make progress on implementing the 4 remaining recommendations. So attachment 1 to our report highlights management's comments on their progress towards fully implementing their recommendations. 3 out of the 4 of them will be implemented before the end of the year. And we're satisfied that with the progress that's being made. We'll perform further work to confirm and verify that when these recommendations have been fully implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, the recommendations that you were referring to, Ms. Chan, those are the item 15.3 recommendations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Is there anything else from the AG's office?
No, that is the end of our update to you on the status of implementations of the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, dealing with item 15.2, the items that Ms. Romeo Beeler referred to, being the Arrow Road acquisition and follow up from that. Are there any questions of staff or Ms. Romeo Beeler on this item? If you have questions, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Ms. Mendez?
Hi, thank you. And I'd like to commend management for the change at the top and implementing the previous recommendations. I just want to confirm, is there a deadline for the remaining recommendations? And I do appreciate that you have full confidence that management will implement them, but is there a deadline for that? And then secondly, is there other follow-up to ensure that what has been implemented thus far is continuously adhered to?
Thank you. In relation to timelines, management sets their own timelines, and you will see the timeline is in the attachment. And for example, in the Arrow Road item, it shows for item 2, Q2 2020. So essentially what happens with timelines, when we prepare our report, management identifies a timeline, and they adhere to that timeline. Really, the board's responsibility to make sure that management continues to progress in these areas. To your second question, Once we've identified with evidence that the recommendation has been implemented, it's then the board's responsibility to make sure that things continue to be implemented. And so through the audit, through questioning management, you can get that assurance yourself directly. So once we identify we have sufficient evidence to confirm implementation, it's the board's governance responsibility to make sure that continues. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will say that on the items that were highlighted in the attachment as outstanding, being a couple of policies. So the draft TPA bylaw, item 2, and item 5, the procedure bylaw. I met with city staff back when we could still meet. I think this was January, maybe it was December, and there was a plan to hopefully get this done relatively soon, given circumstances arisen since then, and movement of important city staff to the COVID response. This has all been delayed somewhat. I have no reason to believe that it won't get done, but it certainly won't get done on the original schedule for very understandable reasons. Are there any other questions of staff or of the AG's office on this item? Seeing none, are there any speakers to the item? Mr. Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On your last comment, the bylaw, obviously there will be delays with the COVID. I think at some point, hopefully this year, the bylaw can include the creation of an audit and finance committee. I think that would be a very useful committee of the board to work on more closely some of the financial matters, the accounting managers, the internal control matters, and other assurances. So I just hope we can still get to that state of affairs so that we at least have that committee in place as part of our board structure. Just a suggestion, but obviously affected by COVID and the availability of the clerk's team, because it's more the city family that are helping us with that rather than necessarily a lot of our own TPA direct staff.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? Or sorry, any other speakers to the item? Pardon me. Any speakers to the item? Seeing none, I will move that we adopt the staff recommendation. Can the board secretary please display the recommendation on the screen? The recommendation is that the Board of Directors of Toronto Parking Authority receive this report for information. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please raise your hands. I'm missing some. No, everyone's there. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Any opposed? Noted. Motion carries. The next item is 15.3. Ms. Chan went over that. This is the results of audit recommendations on the off-street review. Are there any are there questions of either staff or Ms. Chan on this item? Councillor Lai?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is not so much on the off-street parking. It's just we've been told that parking enforcement has been stopped during the COVID-19, especially on some of the main streets. I just want to verify that if this is correct, or is it? Are we aware of that, or is it going to affect our revenue for 2020 on that one?
Ms. Oliphant, thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. My understanding is that there is still some on-street enforcement, although I hear it is light. I do expect that it will impact our revenue in 2020.
So just a follow-up question. So that is correct, that some of the main streets are not being enforced during this COVID-19. Is that correct?
I think that question is best asked to the Toronto Police Services. The information I have is that enforcement is light. I'm not certain that it's actually stopped.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lai. Thank you, Ms. Oliphant. Are there any other questions on this item? Seeing none, any speakers to the item? Seeing none, I will move that we adopt the staff recommendation. Can the board secretary please display the recommendation on the screen? The recommendation is that the Board of Directors of Toronto Parking Authority receive this report for information. All those voting in favor, please raise your hands. Oh, sorry, can I ask the screen to move? Thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much to staff and to the Auditor General staff. The last item for our meeting today is item PA 15.4, Toronto Parking Authority Off-Street Parking Rates Overview and amendments, to Toronto Parking Authority Policy Resolution 2-1, Parking Rates for Off-Street Facilities. I'd like to ask Ms. Oliphant to provide a brief overview of this item to the board.
Thank you, Hartley. As previously requested and to address the Auditor General report recommendations, we are recommending updates to the off-street rate setting policy to reflect current practices and support fair market value pricing through the management of occupancy targets. Jeff, would you please provide your comments on this item?
Good afternoon, everyone. So the purpose of this report is to update our off-street rate setting guidelines to focus on the 85% occupancy target, which we've been consistently using to guide rate adjustments that provide an availability of parking for the short-term parker. At the same time, we're recommending that the half-hour 75% competition benchmark be replaced with a more general benchmark that will ensure the half-hour rates are set at or below competitor pricing, where there are comparable competitor lots that are a source of competition. The impact of this policy update is not expected to be significant, as past rate adjustments have factored in occupancy targets already. Most recently, our 2019 off-street rate review focused on increasing rates where peak occupancy was equal to or greater than 85%. 85% has been TPA's indicator of price elasticity when considering rate adjustments and is monitored on a regular basis through the annual rate review, or more frequently as may be required. In reviewing the performance of TPA's off-street facilities as part of this policy review, it is evident that past pricing decisions supported by the 75% benchmark have not resulted in significant missed opportunity, with only a handful of locations in high demand areas that would warrant rate adjustments under pre-COVID-19 conditions. The bottom line that we found through the analysis is that we should be setting rates so that supply meets demand, which the 85% target helps to establish. Firstly, in lower demand areas, we need to be mindful that our rates are set to sufficiently cover our operational costs, so we don't want to drop them too far. Been using 85% as a target, which helps to maximize turnover and therefore revenue. The target also ensures that short-term parkers are able to find a parking space and that TPA can get all the gettable parkers. In looking at the 85% target, some may ask, why not 90, why not 95%? And it really comes down to the characteristics of the lot, the size of the location, or the number of spaces, the location itself, and the overall demand profile that we see in parking behavior. Setting rates to achieve 90% occupancy may be too high in some situations, as the lots will fill up and prevent the turnover in parking that we're trying to target. Also to keep in mind is we adjust rates in 25-cent increments, so it's not possible to align pricing with occupancy in a really, really precise way. 85% leaves room to adjust upwards or downwards depending on the specific situation. When we look at the competition, private operators tend to price for all-day parking to support their tenants. We know from experience that all-day parking doesn't generate the revenues that we're looking for, as you need the turnover throughout the day to really maximize the returns. And this all comes back to our pricing strategy, which back in December 2019, Ian Mayer presented to the board about. We want to ensure an availability of short stay, high turnover parking, and therefore we price our facilities to provide affordable short-term parking, discourage long-term parking, especially in the downtown and midtown areas of the city, and to generate sufficient revenue to offset our operating expenses. As we look forward, we will be surveying competitor occupancy and rates so that we can better understand demands in the area of our off-street facilities, particularly in the high demand areas. Thank you. Happy to take any questions on the report and policy amendments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oliphant and Mr. D. Are there any questions of staff on this item? If you have questions, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Mr. Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the note and the attachments. I'm sometimes a little bit daft, so I found it a bit difficult to fully understand the note. So I just want to summarize a couple of conclusions I came from both Jeffrey D's comments now and reading the note just to make sure I've got it. One is that we have this 85% utilization thing, and we're not touching that. That's staying the same. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. So the thing that's really changing is this 75% half-hour comparability to those off-site, off-street parking where there happens to be a competitor. In 60, 70% of the lots, we don't really have a competitor, but in a good chunk of them we do. And for those ones, we've been using some kind of 75% of their rate for half-hour parking. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so the note today, what you're saying is we're going to change that 75% calculation rate gizmo to a different tool, which is an average comparable rate. Again, only in the context where there's competitors that we can compare the rate to, and that will affect X number of our parking lots. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's good. So I'm all in support of what you've done. If I can just close with a question on you went a little bit further in the note, which I think is great. You looked at evening and you looked at weekend. It seems from your note the evening will need a little bit more in-depth analysis. But on the weekend rates, which I take from the note, our rates are a bit higher than competitors. My question is, couldn't we maybe next meeting deal with that and lower those weekend rates so we don't waste the asset? Because it's pretty clear from your top line analysis here that our weekend rates in those particular lots, the ones that you've identified, are too high. The only conclusion is going to be to lower them. Maybe I'm wrong about that. So I'm just wondering if you could do something faster on the weekend rates than necessarily the further in-depth analysis will be needed on out.
Yeah, we can definitely take a look at the weekend rates, and I would agree with you that there is an opportunity to bring them down a little bit to encourage demand and revenues, which is really key at this time. So, I think that's something we can look at right away.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Thank you, Mr. D. Are there any other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none. Oh, Ms. Farrow, yes, apologize.
I would just like to endorse looking at the weekend rates. That's the question I had, and so I'd encourage that.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, are there any speakers for the item? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. I will be very brief. Good to see everyone for another month of virtual TPA. I just wanted to quickly thank our staff, both Jeff and Robin, for this this work on this. You know, I know a lot of this came from questions I was asking back in the fall through the budget cycle, and we've continued this process over the past number of months. So it was great to get the report in front of us, and I appreciated the opportunity to read and review it. I think it's safe to say that policy is not always glamorous, but when we articulate what our policy objectives actually are, that ultimately translates into what we see on the ground and the actions that we take, both as the Toronto Parking Authority and in so much as it's supporting our broader city building objectives. I'm seeing that come through much more clearly in the language and bringing us in alignment with some of our other divisions and agencies here at the city and what we're all effectively trying to accomplish as local government and agencies of the City of Toronto. One of the things I was most excited to see was language around where we're setting rates to, provide a community service that supports local business. And I think now, frankly, more than ever, that is absolutely critical and paramount in our thinking. We also cleaned up some of the language around encouraging transit use, which I think is consistent with a number of other city building objectives. So way to go, TPA. Way to go, staff. Way to go, board. These are important, subtle, but really important nuanced distinctions. And I think it brings us and moves this corporation forward. Parking has a role to play in a lot of the things that we're trying to do as a city. So kudos to everyone and way to go.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Any other, I feel motivated now, any other speakers to the item? Seeing none, I will move that we adopt the staff recommendation. Can the board secretary please display the recommendation on the screen? The recommendation is that the Board of Directors of Toronto Parking Authority approve the amendments to Toronto Parking Authority Policy Resolution 2-1, Parking Rates, Off-Street Facilities, in Appendix A, provided to you, and direct the President, Toronto Parking Authority, to enact this policy resolution as amended. Thank you, Madam Secretary. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, directors and staff. That concludes our business for today. I appreciate all of your thoughts and contributions to this meeting. Virtual is tricky, but I think we're getting the hang of it. Please stay safe. Please wash your hands. Please follow the advice of the medical officer of health. Please use bike share to get out of the house. And I look forward to seeing you at our next special meeting. Our meeting is now adjourned. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, everyone.